Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and this is my twice weekly show that nearly always goes out live, very occasionally goes out as a recording, but we are live again today. It's yet another lovely sunny day here in London. Temperatures not particularly great. It's just about 20 degrees, 68 Fahrenheit, but that's a perfect riding day. And the forecast is looking pretty good for the rest of the day too. So if you are out there on the bike later, looks like it's going to be fun for you. Morning, Paul. Paul's looked in. Good to see you, Paul. Well, what have I got for you in today's show? Well, we are covering the bus lane petition that MAG says has been snubbed by the government. A survey suggests that all road users, cyclists included, want potholes fixed as a priority. A rather alarming story from Gusau province in Nigeria, which suggests that state security agencies have been directed to shoot motorcyclists on sight. I'll have a look at that and explain what that's all about as best I can. We shall be having a look at Sinnis's offering of an affordable and attractive little 125 trail bike. Suzuki have developed technology which will be able to recycle vehicle batteries into solar power storage for streetlights. And finally, today's discussion point, I'm coming back to it again, but it's theft again. And why are bikes getting high-tech electronics when we still have to rely on mechanical steering locks? I think that's a question that we really do need to answer if we possibly can. So stay with me for the next 30 odd minutes if you possibly can. And if you don't forget, if you can't make it live, you can always catch up over on my YouTube channel. That is Survival Skills UK. Don't forget that all important UK at the end of it. If you don't get that in there, you'll find somebody sharpening Boy Scouts with knives or something similar. All right, okay, so on with the show. Now, I do have a couple of little housekeeping events that I just want to cover. Now, first of all, don't forget that it is the last chance to book up for July's talk series. The online event will be covering cornering and fixing cornering problems. And I think you'll find this one particularly interesting, actually, if you do come along to it. The upshot of this is not your regular better biking skills approach to cornering. What I'll be doing is actually looking at cornering crashes and trying to explain exactly how it is that crashes occur in corners. So do try and pop along to that. And that's at 8 o'clock tonight. Tickets are still available till 6 o'clock, at which point the doors shut basically, because I will be getting ready to do the talk. And if we can get you in to do that, it'll be good fun. So do come along if you possibly can. Right, now I do have the 2 ride outs scheduled as well for July. The first one is I'll talk about is Saturday 23rd. That's a rescheduled ride that was due to go out a couple of months ago, but unfortunately it was cancelled due to cycling event having closed the roads I was about to use. So that's now 23rd of July, 10 o'clock in the morning for that one. If you're interested, Epping out into Essex and Suffolk, that should be a lovely ride. And I've also fixed a date for an evening ride. There were some requests for this. At the moment, nobody has actually signed up for it, even though they asked for an evening ride. This is Wednesday the 13th, so this will be next week, and it's St Albans out into the Chilterns, and again that should be gorgeous if the weather plays ball. Use the Tiny HQ link in the preamble to the show to book either of those. Don't forget the rides are free. The talk is a £5. That's roughly 2.5 litres of fuel at today's prices. Now, on with the news then. So the first news story I've got to cover today is actually about bus lanes. Now, the Motorcycle Action Group is calling the government's response to a public petition which called for powered two-wheelers to be allowed to use bus lanes across the country as a snub. Now, what's this all about? Let's try to explain. Basically, at the moment, the problem is that bus lanes are accessed on by the authority basis. Now I'm trying to bring up a picture of a bus lane here and failing miserably. There it is. Let's see if I can get that up on screen for you. Sometimes the computer just doesn't want to play ball. There it is. We click that button there. And there we go. We have a picture of a bus lane. Okay, excellent. So we got there in the end. The rules for bus lanes, obviously the sign has to tell you that you can use the bus lane, and you can see there in the picture a little graphic which indicates that bikes, taxis, cycles and buses, of course, are all allowed in that particular bus lane. Now, the problem is, of course, that outside of TfL, which has basically allowed all TfL routes, bikes access to bus lanes, in London, it's decided by individual councils, and that means there is a patchwork quilt of bus lanes. Some bus lanes accept bikes, others don't. And what that means, of course, is you can be driving down a bit of road in a bus lane because one council allowed it, and cross a boundary, and without any apparent obvious change in the street or anything like that, you can be into another authority which doesn't allow bikes in bus lanes. So you have to leave that bus lane, and you have to basically check each and every single sign as you go down the road, which I think is completely bonkers. And it also means, of course, that whenever you go into a new town, you have to check the bus lane signs in those towns to decide whether bikes are allowed in those lanes. Now, so the petition basically called for a change in the national policy, which would effectively default to allowing bikes into bus lanes. Now, it wouldn't mean that local authorities had to allow bikes in those bus lanes, but it would unify the policies rather than having to rely on each and every individual council to do their own assessment, their own risk assessment. It would all be based on nationally approved practice. Now, to cut it short, this petition had gained over 10,000 signatures. That's the point at which it must get a response from government. But MAG's Director of Campaigns and Political Engagement, Colin Brown, described the petition response as predictably blinkered. Now, the government response, it was published last Thursday. This is what it said. The department already prescribes traffic signs that enable local authorities to allow motorcycles to use bus lanes during their hours of operation. Whether to do so is a decision for them. The department recognises that motorcycling has become increasingly popular, but it should also be acknowledged that, however, that not all bus lanes are suitable for motorcycle access. It is entirely a matter for each traffic authority to decide if this is appropriate. In doing so, they have to bear in mind the needs of other road users. Now, there are some points there which are reasonable. Yes, as I've said, not all bus lanes are suitable for motorcycle use. I would argue that motorcycling has not become increasingly popular. It has been a popular form of transport for decades. The problem is that we just don't get access to those bus lanes. Yes, it's entirely a matter for each authority to decide on a bus lane by bus lane basis, but the problem is that this is an excuse for each authority that doesn't want to allow bikes in bus lanes a chance to run their own risk assessment, their own pilot projects, and basically put the whole thing on the back burner for longer and longer. Now, the petition was raised by a Birmingham-based barrister, a Dr. Mirza Ahmed, and he said the government response is not only disappointing, but potentially quite damaging to biker safety, as it fails totally to address the central issue of the petition, which, as I remind you, was to change the rules so that there is a national approach to bus lane access. And Dr. Ahmad continues, the government appears not to be interested in saving lives, improving traffic congestion, or lessening environmental pollution. Now, the fact is that although many opponents have predicted the opposite, bus lane access for motorcycles does appear to confer safety benefits on the riders by separating them from the mainstream of traffic, but it also appears to have no adverse effects on cyclists or pedestrians. That will be the MAG position, but it's been shown by pilot studies like the one that TfL ran, must be 15 years or so ago. Now, Colin Brown pointed out that the government have shown they are willing to demand action for local authorities on, say, cycling infrastructure. On the other hand, they say they can't make similar demands in support of motorcyclists. And in some ways, that's the more relevant observation, is that there seems to be a positive discrimination for cycling and a somewhat negative discrimination against motorcycling. Now, Mag says that a request to discuss the detail of the petition with the DFT before the response was published was actually ignored, and this is despite Transport Minister Baroness Veer previously promising to look into the issue. And Mag says there's nothing to suggest that any meaningful work has taken place, and Mag is now renewing calls for everyone to sign the petition. The next target is a fairly steep 100,000 signatures. So that would require something like 1 in 10 of every motorcyclist to sign the petition. But if it does get to 100,000, it will trigger a request for a parliamentary debate on the topic. So you can actually find the petition here if you want to go ahead and sign it. All right, okay. Just a quick reminder, the talk tonight is 8 o'clock. Do come along if you possibly can. It's on cornering. The link to that is also in the preamble to the show up there, so do come along. I think you'll find it a fascinating talk. So, next problem. Is there actually anything that drivers, motorcyclists and cyclists do agree on? Well, it seems that there might be, and that is that we all seem to want potholes fixed instead of new bike lanes being put in. Now, although this survey didn't specifically ask motorcyclists, out of the 2,000 people actually asked for their opinion, 712 were actually cyclists. And whilst not too surprising, 4 out of every 5 drivers said that they would rather authorities spent cash fixing potholes than building new cycle lanes, what was fairly astonishing is that the researchers, now the research was conducted by Opinium on behalf of an insurance provider, Insure the Gap, they found that 3 out of 4, 71% of cyclists actually agreed with the drivers. So the survey did ask several other questions, and drivers and cyclists also agreed on drink driving and speed limits. 91% of motorists and 77% of cyclists thought the laws on speeding and drink driving should apply equally to pedal cycles and cars. Similar numbers thought that helmets should be compulsory when cycling on the road. On the topic of insurance, 84% of car drivers believed cyclists should carry third-party liability cover. And according to this survey, a rather surprising 63% of cyclists agreed. I wonder how many of those 63% actually do have third-party liability cover. Not so many cyclists agreed that cyclists should pay road tax, however. 61% of drivers thought that was a good idea. 55% of cyclists were against that idea. The survey also suggested that most cyclists supported greater regulation of e-bikes. 2/3 of both groups thought that electric bikes should actually have separate rules from push bikes, which is interesting. Ben Walterton of Insure the Gap, he said, whilst more cycle lanes will be the dream for most cyclists, the need to improve the quality of the roads is something that unites drivers and cyclists, as potholes are a serious risk for all road users. And yes, certainly motorcyclists would definitely concur with that particular statement. Now, don't forget, if you enjoy the show, you can always support me via my coffee page. £3 buys me a cuppa, but it also buys you a month's access to all the supporter content over there, which currently stands at around 750, getting on to 800 articles that you can read about biking skills. My tips on Tuesday and my skills on Saturday posts, which have been running for 10 years now on Facebook, are all being transplanted over there. I've nearly got 2020 up to date, and that will be the last year of the backlog, and then they will go up on a concurrent basis as I post them on Facebook. They will also go up over on Coffee. And if you want to get a flavour of what's over there, go and have a look anyway, because there is plenty of free content if you go through the site. So if you're happy with the show, you're happy by buying me a cuppa. It's always much appreciated. It keeps me coming back and doing this show more. Now, we talk about our problems as motorcyclists on the road here, and we kind of have this impression that everybody's out to get us on the roads. But sometimes when I actually look at the problems of motorcyclists in other parts of the world suffer, I think, bloody hell, boys and girls, we are lucky. Now, I had not heard of the city of Gusau. It's actually located in northwestern Nigeria, and it is the capital of Zamfara state. And last Sunday, the Zamfara government advised individuals to obtain guns to defend themselves, quote, against the bandits, quote unquote, due to a resurgence of what they described as insecurity in the state. Now, this was in response, this news item said, to recent escalating attacks, kidnapping, and criminal levies being enforced on innocent communities. This act of terrorism has been a source of worry and concern to the people and the government of the state. Therefore, in order to deal decisively with the situation, the government has no option than to take these measures. Now, amongst the measures, the governor ordered the immediate closure of all markets, including livestock markets, but that's not the only step. Also banned is the selling of petroleum products in several areas, and a ban on the riding of motorcycles. Now, how are they going to enforce that ban? Simple. Quote, anyone found riding motorbike within the areas is considered as bandit, and security agencies are thereby directed to shoot such persons at sight. The security agencies are, by this announcement, directed to ensure strict compliance. Now, frankly, that is absolutely terrifying. If it's a case of having to share the road with cars, being forced out of bus lanes, or bouncing through potholes, I really, really would take any of that over being shot at as a suspected bandit simply for riding a motorcycle. Right, okay, here's a question for you. Whatever happened to the popular 125 trail bike? Now, if you learned to ride back in the 80s or even into the 90s, you probably remember the trail bikes. They were a popular class, and for years there were hundreds and thousands of learners all zooming around riding these little 125cc bikes with the high handlebars. You probably remember one of the most popular of the lot was the Yamaha two-stroke DT125. That went from a sort of fairly basic twin shock machine when it first appeared to a pretty sophisticated liquid cooled bike by the time it was discontinued. Now, that machine probably set the pace, I would argue, but basically all the Japanese manufacturers had their own 125s trail bikes in either two-stroke or four-stroke format, and the big market for these bikes was the learner market, but it wasn't the only market. Now, many experienced riders actually also enjoyed the light weight of these machines. The MTX 125 here, that's not actually the bike itself. I couldn't find a picture of my brother's bike. I know I've got one somewhere, but he owned an MTX 125 like this one, little two-stroke trailie for doing some off-road riding. And basically the 125s had enough power to be to cope with mild off-roading, and they still had enough road manners to be entirely practical as a means of getting from dirt to dirt via tarmac. So he actually owned that bike. I rode it a couple of times and it was great fun to ride. I never fully understood why it was that bikes like this suddenly went out of favor, but they did, and tastes changed and scooters were suddenly the in thing. Now, off-road riders also seemed to be seduced by the idea that bigger capacity motorcycles were actually essential too. And again, I've never quite understood that. You know, the thing about small motorcycles is that they are very, very manageable. Anyway, to cut a story a bit short, here is the Sinnis XE125. Now, is there a place for this bike in today's market? Now, it is Chinese built, but it has got the specs on paper. It's a liquid cooled 4-stroke 125 trail bike, and it's said to combine a modern engine with decent performance, trail bike styling, and ergonomics for a novice-friendly ride. And it all comes in at under £3,400. Now, historically, Chinese motorcycles have been seen as suffering low build quality, just like the Japanese actually did before them, as it happens. But whilst the Chinese bikes, the Japanese bikes got steadily better and better to the point where nobody thinks twice about reliability, there is still this perception that Chinese bikes aren't at that level. Now they are getting better and better, and some of the best known bike manufacturers, of course, now source engines and even entire bikes from China. Now, I will agree, some of the earlier Chinese 125s were woeful. I had to ride a couple. Many struggled to get anywhere near the 11 kilowatt limit for a 125 A1 learner bike, and I remember trainees turning up on bikes that could barely reach 50 miles per hour and having to tell them that they couldn't use their own bike. They'd have to hire one of ours for the test because it simply wasn't fast enough to take the light motorcycle license test. So this is the first bike to use Sinnis's all-new single-cylinder motor. It's liquid-cooled, double overhead cam, 4-valve, 124cc 4-stroke. Bang on the A1 test limit, makes a claimed 14.8 horsepower at 9,000 RPM, and it is Euro 5 compliant too. Now, if the motor does meet those claimed specs, I can quite believe it when Sinnis says the machine's good for over 60 miles per hour. Now, clearly, top speed always depends on partly gearing, partly on wind resistance, and a naked trail bike is never going to have good aerodynamics. But I have ridden the old Transalp 125 Honda, which did actually make the maximum the law allowed, and that bike had a genuine top speed behind its fairing of just over 70 miles per hour, GPS confirmed, incidentally. But what you noticed more than anything with that bike was actually the added pulling power, which helped you up hills. You know, under 15 horsepower may not sound much, but quite frankly, when you've ridden the 11 horsepower CG125, you really feel the extra 4 horsepower. Anyway, back to the Sinnis. What do you get? Wavy discs front and rear, ABS, of course, that stops it. 21-inch and 18-inch tyre wheel combination. You get knobbly style tyres on it. Upside down front forks at the front. Something a little bit unusual at this end of the market, though, is a rising rate monoshock rear end. Now, the old MTX Honda had the ProLink rising rate suspension, but that's something that's been ditched as a cost-cutting measure on many bikes, even on bigger machines. My own XJ6, for example, has straight push suspension. Now, rising rate, how it works is it changes the leverage on the shock as the suspension moves through its travel. So the idea is you can start nice and soft to get a nice compliant bounce as you go over a bump, but then as you reach the top of the travel of the shock, the mechanical leverage on the shock gets firmer. So basically, it gives a shock absorber an easier time. You're said to get enduro-derived geometry here to provide confidence-inspiring control at all speeds and terrains. It's said to be optimized for sitting or standing, and it's also aimed at full-size riders. It's not a 3/4 scale model of a motorcycle, which is something you could argue the CG125 is. So that should help with comfort for adult riders as well. It's also a perfect riding position for riding in town. I've always liked trail bikes in town. The tubular steel frame apparently bolts up in the middle. I'm not quite sure why that is, unless it means the rear subframe is replaceable. That's often damaged in crashes. The entire bike weighs in at a claimed 140 kilograms, which is just over 300 pounds. So not that light, but not that heavy either. But most importantly, the bike should be light on the wallet. I guess you should get 90 odd miles per gallon out of a the tank. But 3,399 plus on the road charges is pretty bargainous for a little bike like that. Hopefully it could relaunch the lightweight trails bike class. Frankly, if I had the room, I'd be tempted. The odd afternoon or evening pottering around dry green lanes in the summer is definitely something I enjoyed doing. I used to do a bit of that when I had my old NX 650 Dominator, and great fun though it was, it really was a bit too heavy. I often thought about picking up a second-hand 125, but never did. The only thing that I can see is that there will be a bike theft problem. These bikes are thief magnets because, of course, they end up being ragged around fields and annoying the locals in parks after having been half-inched by your local ne'er-do-well. So if you do get one, make sure you secure it. Just because it's a budget bike, it doesn't mean it needs budget security. Right, okay, so we've got a couple of other people looked in that I meant to say hello to. Clive's looked in. Nigel has also looked in. And Nigel says, careful you don't drink too much coffee. Sometimes I mix it up with tea or even a soft drink, Nigel. Thank you. Nigel is one of my regular contributors. So let me just say thank you to him out loud. Now, one question that has been regularly asked about the move to electric vehicles is, what do you do with the batteries from an end of life vehicle? This doesn't necessarily mean a vehicle's reached the end of its useful working life, of course, because we should be fully aware that many motorcycles and even a lot of cars are written off in collisions. So here is an answer. Suzuki is working on developing the technology that would recycle lithium batteries into energy storage for solar-powered streetlights. Now, there's not a lot of detail in the story that I've seen, but it seems that the project is funded by cash granted to Suzuki through Japan's existing vehicle recycling fees. Now, Japan has strict rules that require companies that produce a product to engage in the proper disposal of that product once it's run its course. And since 2002, automobile manufacturers have been required to collect and either recycle or destroy the reclaimed materials that they can process from worn out cars. And that cost was built into the new vehicle price. Now, here's the good news. Suzuki says that it plans to make this technology open source as part of its non-profit recycling and sustainability initiatives, though, to be honest, how hard can it be to hook up a rechargeable battery to a solar panel to run the light? I've got something very similar outside the shed that cost me about 15 quid. But it does suggest a way of using batteries that still have storage capacity left in them when a car or bike is written off before the battery fails. Of course, eventually that battery will fail, and then recycling the materials inside the battery is another matter altogether. But it does allow interim use of what could be otherwise a redundant part. Right, okay. So on to today's final discussion point. Now, I just mentioned the 125, and the problem with little bikes like that is the fact that they do often get secured with budget locks, and they are a prime candidate for being stolen. Now, as I reported on Sunday in Elevenses, Scottish motorcyclists actually gathered outside the Scottish Parliament Holyrood in Edinburgh to protest against what they described as out of control bike thefts. Now, Edinburgh is reportedly a hotspot for bike theft, and last month I did mention 2 Yorkshire tourists were visiting the city, and they both had their bikes stolen. The engagement with the police was outside the building, and the theft problem was discussed. And I'd love to see some positive progress with the police, but I really expect that all we'll see is a rerun of the lock it or lose it advice that basically punts the responsibility for bike theft back to the owner. And frankly, I'd say that the lack of interest from the police in dealing with the issue is only matched by the lack of interest from bike manufacturers. Now, I've been banging on about the woeful attention to security for several decades, not least because I have had a bike stolen in the past. I was lucky enough that I recovered one. The other one that was stolen disappeared forever, never to be seen again. But most recently, because I can no longer get theft cover here in northwest London, because I do not have a solid brick-built building. That was what was required by one insurance company that refused to quote me, in which to store my bikes. Now, it's pretty tricky to build a garage in a Victorian terrace street. So, but I'm not the only one who is concerned about the bike theft problem. Colin Brown, who I just mentioned in respect to the bus lane issue, he said recently on behalf of MAG's recent research shows that motorcyclists are 11 times more likely to become vehicle theft victims than car drivers. It comes as no surprise that riders are feeling the need to make their voices heard outside the Scottish Parliament, and MAG would like to echo their comments. So he says that motorcycle theft is a scourge, and he also says there is insufficient focus by police forces and wider stakeholder groups. And he continues, whilst technological battles are fought between car manufacturers and car thieves, and vast police time and effort goes into car theft, basic measures such as secure parking facilities for bikes are overlooked. Now, I can't agree with Colin more, and I do actually refer you back to the story last week where the Lahore police began threatening to approach the local government to suspend the manufacturing licenses for bike manufacturers who do not do something to update bike security features, because they feel too much of their own time is taken up dealing with bike theft. Now, my own thinking is that this issue goes well beyond secure parking. Lots of bikes are stolen from commuter parking in bike bays. It's true, but I suspect even more are stolen from home locations. And what frustrates me more than anything else is that bike manufacturers keep promising updated security features, but what do we actually get? Well, we get multi-mode cornering ABS, we get traction control, which can be switched on and off between several settings, we get skyhook suspension, and they're all fitted to a motorcycle which can simply be lifted into a van and driven away to have the rudimentary immobilizers and steering locks overridden. The bike that caught my eye just recently is the latest update to the 16-year-old Piaggio MP3. It's billed as a major update. Now, the MP3 range doesn't suit everybody, but it is a very popular motorcycle with commuters. Those paired front wheels, of course, give it extra stability on wet roads, and so they have sold very well for city riders, even though these bikes really come at a price premium. If you check out the cost of an MP3, it's significantly more than a conventional two-wheeled bike. The top of the range 530, which has just been released, will actually set you back no less than £11,500, and that is the same as a brand new GSX S1000. It's remarkable that you can get a 1000cc bike for the same price as this 500 single commuter. Now, their role as a commuter bike, as I've said, means that they are frequently parked in the same place every day, either in public parking spaces, possibly in the road at home, or perhaps off-road on a driveway. And they are extremely vulnerable for theft. So, how has Piaggio tackled that problem in 2022? Well, here is the update. You get an all-new, best-in-class 7-inch TFT dash with infotainment functions controlled by new switchgear. You get new advanced rider assistance system, and that uses radar to give blind spot information with the appalling acronym of BLISS, and a lane change decision aid system. And if that wasn't enough to get in and out of crowded parking bays, you also get reverse gear and a rear view camera, for God's sake. That's of course plus cruise control and 3 riding modes. Now, the only nod to security in there is keyless ignition, and the car world frankly has shown just how easy it is for the key codes that are transmitted back and forth to the vehicle to be captured and used to unlock a secured vehicle. There are no built-in wheel locks on this bike. There are no integral chains or even mounts for chains. There is no paid for at source GPS tracking. None of that is there. But the trouble is, there is actually no pressure on the manufacturers to prevent theft. Every bike stolen is another potential bike sold, because riders have to replace their missing machines or simply give up riding. So what we do get, though, is a more or less meaningless MCIA secured rating system. Now, this was promised to be something unique. But in fact, it's a simple count of how many recognized security features are fitted to a bike. So you can get up to 3 stars for 125 or 5 stars for a bigger machine. So what exactly are these features? Well, it's these: steering lock, tick; ignition immobilizer system, tick; vehicle marking system, tick. That's what my Yamaha XJ6 comes with. So it's a 3-star bike on this system. I don't get a factory fitted alarm. I don't get a factory fitted vehicle tracking system, even if I have to pay a subscription for it. Now, are any of those likely to stop my Yamaha being stolen? I don't think so. The average steering lock, for example, won't even resist a good yank on the bars. The immobilizer may stop it being ridden away, but the marking system may make it a little bit more difficult for people to shift stolen parts. But that's only if the police are actively monitoring the sale of those second-hand parts. The immobilizer can be overridden. It's fairly simple. There are actually YouTube videos on how to do it. So alarms, well, you get several £100 worth of alarm fitted to your bike, and then somebody lifts it into a soundproof van. Tracking, some vehicles are indeed recovered, but I suspect many more still stay missing. And the insult is that, having bought the bike with the tracker, you actually have to pay a subscription for the service. You may get a year or even 2 years free, but after that you are paying. Now, frankly, if you've just paid 15 grand for a new bike, that should be inclusive in the price of the bike for the lifetime of the bike, in my opinion. Now, essentially, nothing on that MCIA list gives me any confidence that tomorrow morning my bike will be found where I park it tonight. Now, bizarrely, the most innovative anti-theft product I've yet heard of for a bike comes from Tanzania. This concept is the brainchild of one Eliza Sumuwowo, who is a student at the Mwalimu Nyerere Memorial University. And she came up with the idea to help secure motorcycles to reduce theft. And it's just been shown off at the Dar es Salaam International Trade Fair. And she says the idea aims to help motorcycle owners and operators to prevent reported theft incidents involving their motorcycles. Most operators and owners buy motorcycles in order to do business, just to fall into the hands of thugs who cut short their dreams. So what's the product? Well, it's actually an innovative system that uses a scanner installed in the motorcycle's dash, which reads the rider's fingerprint to switch the bike on and off. So thus it replaces a key. It even replaces the so-called keyless ignition system. The fingerprint motorcycle system only recognizes the prints of 2 different people to unlock the bike. Now, there also appears to be a disc lock that has been developed using the system. I did have a photo of this somewhere, but I seem to have lost it. Quick flip through and see if I can find it. Here, yes, there it is. Let me just get that up on screen for you. That is the disc lock, and you can see, if I zoom in there, the fingerprint scanner actually on the disc lock. Now, okay, fingerprint scanning isn't new, of course. Phones are unlocked by fingerprints. That technology has been around for quite a few years, and actually the investigations into the idea of digital security based on fingerprints actually goes back decades. My father actually was a senior fingerprint expert at Scotland Yard, and he was involved in research into digitizing fingerprints back in the late 1970s. So it wasn't that the concept isn't sound, they just didn't have the technology to digitally read a fingerprint back then. So fingerprint passwords are known as biometrics, and they've been marketed as highly secure because the data from your fingerprint is saved only on the device, not anywhere else. It doesn't go up to the cloud, for example. But the system is not fully secure. It is possible to lift fingerprints. You can recreate that print then to unlock devices. Apple's much promoted fingerprint technology was launched, I think it was 2013 or 2015, on the iPhone 5S. It was cracked just 2 days later. But frankly, that level of security is likely to be enough for objects that don't access highly sensitive data. So I would suggest that it's probably fine for your average phone or even something like an inexpensive motorcycle. There is one problem, of course. Once your biometric data has been stolen, it is stolen forever. Unlike a password, you can't change your fingerprint. Of course, you do have 10 fingerprints on each hand, so you can swap your fingers up. There is a degree of future proofing, but I suspect a lot of riders wouldn't think of that when buying a new bike. They just replace it and use the same fingerprint. And of course, if the next machine is targeted by the same thieves who unlock the first, you've now got the code for the second too. And there is, of course, the truly ghoulish image of somebody's finger being hacked off to gain access to a vehicle. But to sum up, I really don't want skyhook suspension. I don't want dozens of riding modes. I don't want adjustable traction control that kicks in when I'm 1 degree off the vertical. I don't want fancy infotainment screens. I just want some bike security that makes thieves look at my bike and decide it's a waste of time trying to nick it. Maybe if manufacturers were made responsible for replacing stolen machines, rather like they are responsible for end-of-life reprocessing in Japan, maybe they would actually do some very rapid reappraisal of the issue. But as long as it's left for the owner to fight out with the insurance company, that's unlikely to happen. Right, that's it for today. End of rant. I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Don't forget ride outs and talk tonight. I'll just give you one final reminder of those. And if you are out there on your bike today and you are enjoying the roads, do make sure you stay shiny side up. Thanks for watching.